Greetings and hello. Yeah, time for the next video. In case you've forgotten, I'm Spartan Bodhi, and welcome to my channel where we talk about all things D&D. Well, I guess not all things. I do have some other content from the start of COVID, but oh well. Moving forward, mostly everything will be D&D, and I think that's fun. So I'm glad you're here, and let's jump into today's video talking about combat. My goal for this video is that by the end of it, you will have a basic understanding of what it looks like to get into combat when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons. Hopefully this video will tie a lot of loose ends together when it comes to understanding some of the abilities we've talked about in some other videos, and by the end of it, you will have not only a well-developed character, but also know how to use them in combat. So first off, let's talk about what combat is. It's one side versus another, typically good guys versus bad guys, and both want different things. And your side will be you and your party and whatever allies they have with them, and the opposing side will be the Dungeon Master controlling monsters or other humanoids or creatures that are opposing you. Dungeons & Dragons is an interesting game in which, well, I've heard it phrased like this before. Overland travel that would take hours to do can be achieved in a span of minutes, whereas combat that would literally take a span of minutes is often achieved over several hours of potential combat. And the reason is thus. In combat, we slow things down so that everyone has a turn, and on that turn you get certain actions or bonus actions, reactions, and movement to create an equal playing field in which the monsters and your characters have opportunities to fight one another. This is boiled down into what we call combat rounds. Each round of combat takes approximately 6 seconds, in which every single character that has a place in the initiative order, we'll get there in a second, gets to take a turn. After everyone in that round has taken their turn, we'll move on to the next round of combat, and the turn order will start all over again. This brings us to initiative. At the start of the combat, the Dungeon Master will say, "Roll initiative." Oh, those lovely words. At this point, everyone is going to roll their d20 and add their dexterity modifier and any bonus modifiers, hint hint if you took the alert feat, to that roll. The monster or character, I guess I should say creature, with the highest initiative roll will go first. The person who rolled the lowest will go last. And sometimes there will be ties, and typically speaking, when this happens, the DM will determine who gets to go first in that particular instance. I've played with DMs who simply like to look at who has the higher dexterity modifier, others would like to have you roll for it, and others just like to let you choose. Either way, once the initiative order is created, the DM will also determine who is surprised at the start of combat. Being surprised is somewhat of a status condition. We'll talk more about status conditions in the adventuring video, which probably will either be next or 2 videos from now. I'm also contemplating doing the spellcasting video next, so we'll see. But back to the point, if your character is surprised, that means that they're not going to get a turn at all on the first round of combat. Them being surprised means they're trying to comprehend their situation around them, and they get no action whatsoever on that first round of combat. This is usually accomplished by an enemy sneaking up on you or setting an ambush, or vice versa. If you and your party can set up a successful ambush, then the enemy characters might be surprised as well. Tactics are important. Now that we've established who goes when and how, it's time to understand what you get to do on your turn. There are 4 different things that you get to do on, well, 3 different things you get to do on your turn, and 1 thing you get to do on an enemy's turn. Movement is the very first thing that we typically do in a combat scenario. Do you remember when we talked about your character having a move speed? This would have been the racial video. Well, when it comes to combat, typically speaking, we use a 1-inch square grid in which all of the combatants are placed in tactical formations or behind cover and are going to move around and engage one another in combat. When on that grid, each one of those 1-inch squares represents 5 feet of movement. Your character gets to move up to their movement speed every turn and engage enemies as they see fit. If you're a axe-wielding barbarian, you need to be within 5 feet of an enemy creature to make your swings. But if you're a spell-slinging wizard or a longbow-shooting ranger, you get to shoot at range instead, and you don't have to close the distance before making those attacks. Each one has its benefits, and certainly these need to be understood before you get into that combat situation. A barbarian is not going to be as effective at range, and a wizard is likely going to suffer quite a bit from being up up in the thick of things. All that aside, it's your turn and you need to make a decision. Once you've moved, now you get to determine how you're going to spend your action and your bonus action. We'll start with actions, as those are going to be the bread and butter of your turn. You can do a lot of things with an action. Most commonly, if you're a martial class, you're going to be making attacks. Now, we've talked about these a little bit when it comes to understanding your proficiency and equipment, and how by pulling out your longsword or your axe, you're going to make an attack against the creature and try and roll higher than their armor class, or AC, if you remember from the equipment video. If you haven't watched that video, I think I do a decent enough job of explaining it there, so maybe you should go back and check it out there so you have a full understanding of how weapons and armor work. But back to the point, if your character actually lands the hit, you roll higher on your attack roll than the monster's AC, you will roll your damage. If the damage is enough to bring that creature to 0, then you've slain the monster or creature that you're fighting, and you get to either move on to the next target, or the combat is over. If not, then you've dealt damage to them, and eventually that target's HP will reach 0, and at that point you can declare the fight over. Typically speaking, this happens when there are no more combatants from a single side. Typically all of them have been defeated, or run away, or some combination of the two. Or surrendered. That also can happen. Usually that will be up to the DM. But making your attack is important. We'll come back to this in just a second, because there are certain things that can happen with attack rolls that are either super awesome or super not. And we'll cover them when it comes to the critical success or failures. But moving right along, other things that you can do with your action would be to cast a spell, so long as the spell has the tag of a 1-action cast time. Spells fall into the same categories: action, bonus action, and reaction. But typically speaking, your action spells are going to be your most powerful spells that really determine the course of the battle. Another possible action would be the dash action. Maybe your character couldn't quite get close enough, or maybe they're trying to escape. In this case, that potential 30 feet of movement is certainly not enough to get to where they're wanting to go. Should they want to, they can take the dash action and move their movement once more. Think of this as the dead sprint. They're not going to be making an attack, they are hauling booty to try and get the job done. Or maybe that's not what they're trying to do at all. Perhaps they're trying to escape and dodge out of the way of a fearsome enemy that's trying to gut them. If your character is low in HP, one more strike might be all it needs to put them into the dying state, unconscious and rolling death saves. We'll get there, hold on. But if they want to make it out without suffering an attack of opportunity, I know, we'll get there too, your character can take the disengage action. This means they get to get away without the opponent making an opportunity attack. That is, unless they've taken the sentinel feat, as we talked about in the last video. Or maybe their character understands that this creature can't be escaped, and instead they want to simply try and dodge out of the way of an attack. The dodge action can be very helpful indeed. When you take the dodge action, enemies attacking you have disadvantage. Once more, that means they're going to roll twice and take the lower of the 2 rolls. That's really good for you. Also, any dexterity saving throws they might have to make are going to be made at advantage for the rest of the turn. As we talked about with monks actually get this as a bonus action instead of an action, meaning they still get to make their attack on their turn, as well as get into a defensive position while using a key point and potentially prevent the enemy from damaging them. Perhaps one of your party members needs help. The help action allows them advantage on either an attack roll against a creature that is nearby, or advantage on some sort of skill check that might be needed during combat. Sometimes the best combat scenarios are where not everyone is fighting and someone's simply trying to open a door or secure a portal or prevent some magical ritual. In this case, the person who is trying to accomplish this task might need a little extra aid, and your character might be exactly the person for the job. Or perhaps it's early on in combat and the enemy hasn't gone yet, and you have the chance to hide and remain undetected. The hide action allows your character to do exactly that. They will make a stealth check as opposed to the creature's perception check, or passive perception depending on how the DM rolls in this circumstance. And if your stealth check is higher, that monster or creature or whatever is trying to look for you can't see you. And that's really good for you. Rogues get to do this as a bonus action. I should also note that rogues can take the disengage action as a bonus action as well, meaning they can still potentially make their attack or whatever else that is that they want to do on their turn. Oh, they also get to dash for their bonus action. Rogues can be really broken in the right hands. Or maybe they're not quite sure what they want to do and are waiting for the right trigger to take place. Maybe they haven't seen the monster yet and they want to ready an attack for when that monster shows their nasty face. The ready action is actually a really suitable option for you. Now, I should say, readying an action, you need to declare as the player what the trigger is going to be in order to let that action come to be once the trigger is met. It also requires your reaction once the trigger takes place. So yes, it can be very beneficial to hold your attack for when your party member is out of the way or finishing casting that spell to hit them with a fireball once your teammate has, again, rolled out of the way, or if the monster hasn't shown up yet and you're simply holding that shot on your bow. This allows you to potentially still deal damage on your turn, turn, when in reality you can't see the creature yet. So, a ready action can be very helpful. But remember, it does cost you both your action and your reaction in order to follow through on this activity. So choose wisely, as you only get one of each of these things per round of combat. Or maybe back to the help action, you're the one actually trying to get something done. The search option allows you to try and find something in the midst of a battle. Perhaps you're trying to investigate for some special hidden lever or pulley system that will open a door or allow your team to escape, or find some magical object. Either way, you're going to be employing the search action. And once you find said object, you're going to need to use the use an object action. All of these things are spelled out for you within the player's handbook, specifically in the 9th chapter, which is conveniently titled Combat. So, those are pretty much all of the actions that you can take on your turn. So let's jump back to the attack action while we're at it. This attack could fall on an enemy's turn. We talked about opportunity attacks a little bit, but to fully understand them, if you are in combat with a creature and that creature is losing and wants to try and get away, or decides that another target is more worth its while, it might leave your zone of engagement. If that's the case, you get to make a swing against that creature. It's one attack. You don't get your full attack against this creature. It's one, unless that creature takes the disengage action. But if it's a monster with high AC and a lot of HP, it's probably not going to. Swing away, Merle. Swing away.
Swing away, Merle. Merle. Swing away.
Now once again, I should state, once you've used a reaction, you can't use another one until your turn comes back in the round order. So make sure you're using them wisely, especially if you have a feat like Sentinel. The way that things are worded can get kind of tricky, and more often than not, if you're asking your Dungeon Master for clarification, they're more than happy to let you know what is and what isn't allowed in combat, opportunity attacks, and how to apply your abilities and feats to get the very best out of this combat scenario that you can. Try to remember, the Dungeon Master is there to help you have fun and tell a story. Yes, they're controlling the enemy side, but ultimately they're doing that because you're playing a game together. They're still on your side, and they want you to win. But they're probably going to make it kind of challenging. High risk, high reward. Try to remember that. Unless your DM is a jerk and just wants to kill you. Oh, that's right. I'm sometimes looking at you, Gunner. Perhaps your character is a two-weapon fighter, dual wielding or going akimbo style. Either way, if you're making an attack with one weapon, and yes, we did cover this in the equipment section, if you are holding a light weapon in your offhand, you can use a bonus action to make another attack. Or, back to the regular attack action on your turn, there are two additional attack options when it comes to how you go about interacting with your enemy. Should you wish, you can try and attempt to grapple them and restrain them, allowing you advantage against them and them disadvantage against you. This would account for one of your attack options against them per turn. In other words, if your character has the extra attack feature, like a fighter at 11th level who gets 3 attacks, one of those attacks could be to try and grapple an enemy, and the last 2 could try and attack them after that grapple succeeds or fails. The other option is a shove attack, and should you succeed, oftentimes the other creature is forced to roll an athletics or acrobatics check against it, then that creature will fall prone. A creature that is prone can be attacked with advantage by a melee combatant. An advantage is a good thing. Now let's say that advantage pays off, and you roll that beautiful natural 20. Congratulations, you've just landed a critical hit. A critical hit means that you are going to effectively double the dice that you're rolling in damage on that creature. And this applies to any dice that would be included in that attack. Yes, rogues, I'm looking at you. Your sneak attack dice, those get doubled too. So let's say your character is using a dagger. Instead of rolling 1d4 plus your modifier, if you land that crit, it's going to be 2d4 plus your modifier, according to the base rules here. There are some tables that look to homebrew critical hits and what they look like. For instance, some tables simply double the damage you've rolled after you roll it one time, or like me, borrow from other rule systems entirely. I kind of like the 4E system for rolling critical hits, but that's just me. That's something my players and I had agreed upon in the past. It's all dependent on the table and what everyone wants to do. But regardless, your critical hits are going to deal incredible amounts of damage. Hopefully. Probably. And when they do, you're gonna feel awesome. Now, I should say, it's not just weapons that can roll critical hits either. If a spell has an attack roll, that spell can also land a critical hit on a natural 20. All of a sudden, that firebolt lands its mark, and maybe that person just catches fire entirely. Now, it's not that they would take fire damage every single turn, but they're going to take a lot more fire damage that one round, which again, is pretty daggone awesome. Or, on the other hand, let's say that you rolled the dreaded natural 1. This means that your character has critically failed, and this attack is going to miss attacks, regardless of your modifier. Even if you're swinging against that ogre that has no armor on and a negative dex mod, your character is going to miss, regardless of their modifiers. Okay, now that we've covered the action economy for actions, let's talk about bonus actions. Bonus actions can be done in addition to actions, and often are granted from special class features, potentially a feat, an offhanded attack, as we talked about earlier, if you're two-weapon fighting, I still don't recommend it, or casting a spell. There are certain abilities that do count as bonus actions and can be used in conjunction with an action. These will be specified within the class ability itself, and more often than not, you're going to want to be using every one of these every turn if you can. Reactions work very similarly to bonus actions in that they are awarded by class features, feats, opportunity attacks, or spells. However, these have to be triggered by some outside source. For instance, you can't make an opportunity attack on a creature on its turn unless it is trying to move away from you, or if you have the Sentinel feat and it attacks someone other than you. Those things all of a sudden trigger for you a reaction. And when used properly, these things can totally change the tide of battle. All right, now that we've established what all of these actions are within the action economy, I want to reiterate that you get them back once your turn starts again in the next round. So if your character makes an opportunity attack right before their turn takes place, they would get that reaction back as soon as their turn starts again. But if they use it right after their turn is over on another creature's turn, they have to wait the entirety of the round until the start of their next turn to get that reaction back again. Your DM will hopefully be able to keep track of this alongside of you. And all of these things are here to help balance and create a fair, equal opportunity combat session for both the monsters and the adventuring party. Please don't try and take advantage of this. No one likes it at the table where that one person tries to milk every single reaction they can and begins cheating by taking more than what they're allowed by the rules when everyone else is following them. Let the combat be dramatic. It's okay, I promise. In Dungeons & Dragons, even death is not the final answer. Speaking of, how does one get to a dying state? Well, when one gets hit, one takes damage. And there are a bunch of different damage types within Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There's a list on page 196, which is also conveniently found in the combat chapter. And the damages are as thus: acid, bludgeoning, cold, fire, force. Force is pretty much pure magic energy. Lightning, necrotic. Necrotic would be death energy or death magic, and has everything to do with withering flesh and the soul even. Piercing, poison. This could be venomous stings or toxic gas. Psychic. This would be mind damage or something that affects your psyche. Radiant. Holy damage, which is described here as searing the flesh like fire and overloading the spirit with power. Huh. The more you know. Slashing damage and thunder damage. Ooh, take a d6 thunder damage. But in all seriousness, thunder damage is ultimately really loud sound damage. Careful not to perforate your eardrums in the middle of combat. Each of these damage types is important because certain monsters are going to have resistance to certain kinds of damage. Your party might happen upon a monster that is resistant to weapon damage, slashing, piercing, bludgeoning, and all of a sudden the wizard and cleric slinging fire and radiant are going to be dealing the most damage in the party. The tactics in that combat are going to change dramatically based on who is capable of dealing the most damage. In that regard, it might be beneficial for the fighter to grapple with the monster and try and pin it down so the cleric can continually call down holy fire upon it. I mean, that just sounds cool, but what do I know? Or, in certain regards, and this is much more rare, certain monsters have vulnerability to damage. We've talked about this once before, but vulnerability, which would be the opposite of resistance, means that instead of having incoming damage, you would double incoming damage. And if a monster has vulnerability, holy smokes, employ that vulnerability time and time and time again. Are you fighting a shadow? Hit it with light. That would be radiant damage, because I guarantee you, it's going to help you a lot. Shadows suck. Quite literally, there's a monster in D&D 5th edition called the Shadow, and they're terrifying. Weak, but terrifying if there's too many of them. So there, that one's free. You're welcome. Use it in good health. However, let's say you didn't slay that monster in time, and instead, they're a little closer to slaying you. Falling to 0 HP means that you fall into the unconscious state. Now, once you fall into the unconscious state, you begin making death saves. Pardon me. Tasted like 7-Up and bile. Acid damage? Your character is going to roll a death save every time their turn comes up and they are in the unconscious dying state. In this case, you're going to roll your d20. On a roll of 10 or higher, that means there's a 55% chance of success there. Your character is going to get a success. And upon achieving 3 successes, your character stabilizes and is not going to die outright. However, upon 3 failures, which would be a 9 or lower, your character would expire, dying, and no longer being able to act in combat, period, since they're not living. Whoops. Now, I should state that natural 20s and nat 1s also have critical successes and failures when it comes to death saving throws. A natural 1 means your character fails 2 death saving throws, and is just that much closer to dying in combat. Or instead, let's say you rolled that natural 20 on your death saving throw. Your character regains 1 hit point and becomes conscious right at the start of their turn. So get up and do something. You almost died. Whew. You lucky son of a gun, you. At the point of succeeding 3 death saving throws and becoming stable, your character no longer has to make rolls. That is, unless they take damage from another source, at which point they would return back to the dying state. Now, there is rules for your character dying instantly when there's too much damage left over. Let's say that an attack is made or a spell is cast, and the damage left over after you've dropped to 0 is greater than or equal to your current max HP. In this circumstance, your character dies outright. There is no save. They're just dead. Sorry, do not pass go, do not collect $200, and I hope you have a backup character. Now, I will say this is incredibly rare, but if you decide to pull a Keyleth and jump off of a 1,000-foot cliff and drop to your death, all the while shapeshifting into a goldfish, yeah, things are not going to go well for you.
Can you come help me get this diamond back?
Oh, yeah! Yeah. Am I on the cliff?
You're on the top of the cliff, yeah.
You can do it,
Is
aren't
she
you?
like down? I
Yeah.
know.
I mean, I can come. Oh, are you really?
Can I do it?
It's a really high drop.
Just
Can I
let her
do the
it. Just fucking let her do
Pocahontas
it.
swan dive?
Okay, make an athletics check.
Yes.
Run and cliff dive!
Sail!
Sail! Sail!
Oh no.
Okay, you get a few feet past the cliff edge. Not a majestic jump, and the cliff is not completely sheer. It does slightly angle outward. So you leap off, and as you're falling, you can see you probably have about, I'd say about 300 feet or so before you're going to hit rock.
I'm gonna hit
The
rocks.
side of the cliff.
The cliff is not perfectly vertical. It's a little bit angled, and you're heading down to hit the rock.
I go whoops, and can I do like a gust against the cliff wall to push me back a little bit further?
Go and make a wisdom check. Just a straight wisdom modifier check.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
That's good.
Just straight wisdom
Yes.
modifier. 20.
Okay. Like a gentle fart, you push yourself a little ways from the cliff, and it does, we'll say it does just enough of a shove where your trajectory changes slightly. You may or may not be right where the rock hits the surf. You can test it or not. It's up to you.
Test it, test it.
And this was the end.
Kiki, don't kill yourself over this rock.
It was nice being in a couple.
At the last minute, I'm gonna go and turn into a goldfish.
Before you hit the water?
Or the rock.
Well, I'm assuming the goldfish would make it easier
Terminal
to hit water.
velocity.
Yeah, but you're gonna
That's a
hit
good
rock.
point.
Goldfish are not magnetically attracted to water. They still just
What
fall.
about like
Those are ironfish.
a flying fish or something, so you can like maybe.
I think flying fish actually fly.
No,
glide.
but they got big fins.
They do glide. They
Regardless,
Yeah.
as you turn into a
Oh
goldfish,
no.
Oh no.
rocketing towards the base
Straight
of the
roll.
water.
Here we go.
Oh no. If I
Alright.
killed
He's
you.
taking a picture of it. He's taking a picture of
No,
it.
I'm
No,
not.
he's not. Because she's dead.
This is too many dice for me to roll.
I mean,
What?
I would just pop back to myself. I don't die.
And then any
then take
additional
the
damage
damage.
would go over into your.
And no, I know.
There's too many dice to roll,
Oh my
Marisha.
God,
So
No, it's fine.
It's fine.
We're gods.
Are we?
It's fine.
She says as she dies on the rocks.
Demi Moore
Did you say
God.
we're
That would
gods? Why would you even tempt that right now?
Well,
Why am I drinking your
We're
coffee? I'm
close.
gonna stop right now.
Yeah, but we're
There we
not.
go, but we're not.
Oh, man.
Oh boy.
Oh.
Oh boy.
What is he doing?
Just you and me, sis. Just
No,
you
no,
and
no.
me.
Seriously though, what if she just died?
Yeah.
That would be kind of amazing.
you took 363 points of damage.
You are lying.
No.
You are
Wait,
lying.
that's below.
By hitting rocks?
by hitting rocks at terminal velocity at the it's d6 per 10-foot fallen. Keyleth scatters across the edge of the rock and just crumples into the surf and is now floating.
Wait, what?
Hasta la vista, baby. Another thing that is noteworthy during this process is healing. There are certain ways to regain HP in combat, and most of these are going to come from the use of magic. Your clerics, bards, and potential subclasses of sorcerer or warlock are going to give you some options for healing in the middle of combat. Now, I will say the healing system in D&D is actually pretty pathetic at lower levels. The amount of damage you can deal with low-level spells is not equivalent to the damage you can heal with low-level spells. These spells are ultimately here to prevent someone from dying if they reach 0 HP and go unconscious, or are meant to restore them from this effect and hopefully get them back up in the fight. Your best ways of healing in the game are with resting, either a short rest or a long rest. The prior of which you're going to roll your hit dice, and the latter you're going to just have max HP again. If the HP system is confusing to you, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. There was a video that I saw that really was beneficial for me understanding how one could heal all of their HP in one night. Or if you're just dying to know, reach out to me on social media. I'd love to answer your questions there too. But regardless, healing is not necessarily the most effective thing in combat, but there are certain ways to make it effective while also not sacrificing your actions to do so. The Healing Word spell is probably the most powerful tool that our healers have in terms of getting our teammates back into the action. The Healing Word spell has a range of 60 feet, as opposed to the touch range of a Cure Wounds spell. It also costs a bonus action rather than an action, and only requires verbal components. This means that your character still is going to have their action to use, maybe continue trying to damage the opponent or run away, all the while restoring your teammate back to consciousness, if they had been zeroed in the first place. But maybe there's a tactics video somewhere in the future where we can talk about how to maximize a good healer and how to balance that with a party dynamic. Who knows? If that sounds appealing to you, let me know in the comments below. Now, I will say, if you're fighting a particularly nasty monster, it is possible that that monster has encountered you within their lair. This gets back to the initiative order understanding that we talked about at the beginning of the video. A particularly powerful monster with a lair has lair actions. These take place at the initiative count of 20, and often cycle through a small list of things that will change the way the battlefield works, or provide an extra damage opportunity, or give some sort of buff to the monster you're fighting. Typically, these are very powerful and nasty creatures, which oftentimes have more loot or provide some wonderful story arc, or potentially the big bad boss at the end of an adventure, which is going to feel rewarding in and of itself. But either way, these creatures are not to be trifled with, and you need to be very careful. Try to employ good tactics before getting in. There's something to be said here about trying to do good research on what it is you might be going after. If you can plan ahead accordingly, that can mean the difference between life and death for your party. Oh, which reminds me, if everyone in your party dies in the same combat, we have a special name for this. The Total Party Kill, or TPK for short. I myself, oh no, yeah, I actually have done a TPK. That's a fun story for another time. Well, I mean, it was very close. But again, fun story for another time. I mean, there's no way around it. TPKs are tricky. But remember, death is not always the end of the story. In fact, it just kind of heightens the stakes in my mind. Typically speaking, after dying, you will roll a new character, or in the case that not everyone dies, you might be able to get the body to a temple, or maybe one of your teammates is capable of restoring them back to life through resurrection magic. Those are incredibly dramatic moments within the game, and shouldn't be taken lightly, so embrace it. Death is never really the end. It sucks at first, I know. But more often than not, you're either going to really enjoy any of the resurrection ritual ceremonies that might take place, or bringing in a new character and getting to figure out this new person that's going to join the party. Either way, your DM will be sensitive to this. Again, hopefully, so long as they're not a jerk. And this will only enhance the storytelling at your table. So again, embrace it. These tough combat moments make for wonderful stories later on. Back to those terrifying monsters. Typically speaking, if a monster has lair actions, then they might be powerful enough to be legendary monsters. Legendary monsters have legendary actions. This means that a monster gets to take another additional action on a turn that is not its. Another way of thinking about this would be, after you or one of your teammates has their turn, that monster might decide to take a legendary action. This would happen before the next person's turn in the initiative order, and these fights are definitely the stuff of legend. Hence, the legendary creature with legendary actions. Definitely try to enjoy these fights. This is the stuff that D&D is made of. Whew, yeah, guys, I think that's pretty much it. This is a fun one. Honestly, combat ends up being a major factor in D&D. In fact, a lot of the rules that you find regarding your class and some of the things they're capable of are all oriented around combat. And D&D is primarily a combat system that also uses adventure to help tell a story. Most of the rules that you're going to find in this book are combat-oriented. But one of the things that I've found so very beneficial about combat is that it helps to further the story. Those terrifying monsters that have you screaming in your seat and maybe have some slightly damp pants afterwards, again, those end up being some of the greatest stories we tell to our friends after the fact. And defeating the evil monster at the end of the game feels good. You achieve something, and typically, as I said before, they've got some pretty awesome loot. Getting those magic items, again, feels rewarding, especially if you had to struggle for it. So embrace combat. Understand that it's mostly meant to just help you facilitate your rise to awesome. More often than not, also, depending on your DM's play style of rewarding XP or milestones, certain bosses are going to give you a lot of experience points. You're more likely to level up after a fight with them than you are with just a small band of goblins. So that being said, I hope that this teaches you a couple of things on how you can go about preparing yourself for your turn of combat. I guess I should also say, as a DM, there are certain things that I really want my players to be doing in a combat session. In order to make the combat engaging and feel real and important, try to be engaged with the combat. If the DM or other players look up and you're on your phone or disengaged and not really contributing anything, that's going to take away from the feel of the table, and it's not going to be very good for the environment as you're all trying to work together to overcome this terrible evil thing. Instead, be listening to what's happening. And try to enjoy everyone having a little bit of the spotlight in combat. Enjoy the twists and the turns. It's okay to get frustrated. It's also okay to get super hyped. Again, with high stakes come high rewards. So try to be engaged in combat. And be listening, especially when your turn is coming up soon. There's nothing worse than, okay, fill in player's name here. It's your turn, what are you doing? What happened? Really? Try to be engaged. Listen and follow along and be planning and preparing. And lastly, know what your abilities can do. If we have to stop the actual flow of combat to discuss what the rules are for an ability that you didn't read up on until just now, that's also going to take away from our time at the table. So make sure that you're paying attention, know what your stuff does, and be engaged in the combat. I promise you, it's well worth it. And the more you practice this, the more it'll become routine for you. And celebrate. Celebrate with your fellow characters. Your fellow players. If they get the final, how do you want to do this moment? Shout for them. Get hype. Root for them. The more you do that, the more they'll do that for you when it's your turn. So enjoy it. This is a fun part of the game. Stressful, certainly, but fun. All right, off my soapbox now. So this is it, the end of the video. I wanted to do something a little special with this video. A friend of mine reached out to me, an old high school buddy, and he and one of his students have been watching these videos. And his message just touched my heart. So thank you. And on the day that I'm recording this, the student had a birthday. So Zay, happy birthday to you, buddy. I'm really proud of you. I hope this upcoming year is the best one yet. And again, I'm really proud of the work that you're doing. I'm in your corner, buddy. You rock. Happy birthday. So that's it. That's my special thing. I wanted to include Zay in this video. Zay, when you roll up your first or next best character, dude, let me know. I'd love to hear about him. And I'd love to hear about the combat that he has and the lives that he saves and the bad guys he takes down. All of that aside, I'm glad you're here. And for everyone else, I'm glad you're here too. Thanks for being along for this ride. This has been a lot of fun. So as we sign off, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe button. You're helping my channel to grow, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Thank you, friend. It's an honor to have you here. If this content is helpful to you, please share it with the people that you think are going to enjoy it. Or share it with your grandma. That's cool too. It's good enough for Dale. It's good enough for me. As I said, I'm not exactly sure if we're doing magic yet or adventuring yet, but we are quickly coming to the close of our learning/playing the game video series. And I think at that point, I'll shift into a lot more of the Dungeon Master tips and running the game as opposed to just playing it. Now, that doesn't mean we won't have the aside video talking about really neat concepts that we can explore. Maybe we can do some character optimization build videos. Who knows? Either way, I'd love to hear from you. If you want to reach out to me on social media, all of that will be in the doobly-doo down below. And still working on potential Discord stuff, so bear with me there as we continue to really just navigate these fun open waters. And I've been toying around with an idea as well, but I'm not sure I'm ready to convey it just yet, so stay tuned. Hopefully a special announcement within the next couple of weeks. All that aside, thanks again. And adventure's calling. Are you listening?